It was Saturday, October 31st, 1992, and at 9:25 p.m., a unique one-off live ghost hunting special started its broadcast on BBC One. What followed over the next 90 minutes was an on-air investigation of a haunted council house in North London, a house where Mother Pamela Early and her daughters Suzanne and Kim were being tormented by a poltergeist called Mr. Pipes. Presented by Michael Parkinson in the company of paranormal psychologist Dr. Lynn Pascoe, the show saw Sarah Green and a small camera crew venture into the house to spend the night with the family, investigating the supernatural phenomena occurring in the house and broadcasting their findings live to the nation. But what started as a seemingly harmless exploration of paranormal activity quickly escalated into a night of terror, as the disturbances became increasingly violent and uncontrollable. The only catch was that the whole thing was nothing more than a fictional television drama made to appear as if it was being broadcast live to viewers across the country. However, many viewers believed that what they were witnessing was a genuine haunting, causing widespread panic and controversy. The program's realistic presentation and unexpected twists left a lasting impression on British television, sparking debates about the ethics of broadcasting and the power of media to blur the lines between fiction and reality. The show is still remembered as one of the most notorious broadcasts in BBC history. And in this video, we're going to take a look back at this controversial and chilling broadcast. We'll explore the making of the show, how it manipulated its audience, and the real-life consequences it had for those who tuned in. This is the story of Ghostwatch. Before we start, don't forget to give this video a like, and please subscribe to the channel. Ghostwatch's origins stretch back to the late 1970s and the famous Enfield poltergeist case. Between 1977 and 1979, claims of paranormal activity at a property in North London emerged, alleging a poltergeist was terrorizing the Hodgson family, and in particular focusing on two young sisters, Janet and Margaret. The case became one of the most well-documented and debated poltergeist cases in British history, attracting the attention of both paranormal investigators and the media. It was these events that inspired Welsh screenwriter Stephen Volk to develop a TV show like no other. In October 1988, he submitted an outline to the BBC for a 6-part supernatural serial drama, centered around a journalist teaming up with a psychical researcher to investigate a haunted council house in London. The original plan was for the show to climax in its 6th and final episode with a live TV broadcast from within the haunted house, where all hell would break loose. The BBC was hesitant to commit to a 6-hour miniseries and instead suggested condensing the concept into a one-off 90-minute special. Volk proposed having this one-off special be presented as if it were a real live broadcast from the haunted house. The BBC immediately signed off on the idea and the show went into production. But it wouldn't be until 4 years later in 1992 that the show would be filmed and broadcast to the nation. Stephen got to work on developing the program, and producer Ruth Baumgarten and director Leslie Manning helped shape the idea of what Ghostwatch would become. They had discussed how people could no longer trust what they were seeing on television, and how the lines between fictional and factual TV were becoming increasingly blurred. Although the overall theme of Ghostwatch was to be a dramatization made to look as if it was being broadcast live, it was never their intention to simply trick the audience. Ghostwatch was a scripted drama, and the live TV show aspect was employed simply to make it more effective on the audience. They reasoned that people might be confused for a few minutes, but would eventually realize that what they were watching wasn't real. And while this would turn out to be the case for one part of the audience, many others believed that what they were watching was actually real from beginning to end. In order to add to the show's believability, it was important to bring in the right people to front the show. Michael Parkinson was the most popular talk show host in the country at the time, and producers felt that he would lend an air of credibility and authority to the broadcast. The public trusted him, and his calm, reassuring presence was perfect for the role of host, guiding viewers through the supposedly live investigation with a sense of journalistic integrity. Alongside him in the studio was Dr. Lynn Pascoe, played by Gillian Bevan, a psychologist studying the phenomena occurring in the Hodgson household. The production team also brought in Sarah Green, a familiar face from children's television, and her husband Mike Smith, a well-known BBC presenter. Their involvement added a relatable, down-to-earth quality, further blurring the lines between fiction and reality. Sarah would be the one to actually enter the haunted house, alongside a small camera crew consisting of Chris Miller and Mike Ayton, who were actual BBC technicians, helping add to the believability of the night's events. Mike, meanwhile, remained in the studio, overseeing the phone lines where members of the public were supposedly calling in to share what they had seen or recount their own ghost stories. Lastly, there was Craig Charles, who was known for his role as Dave Lister on Red Dwarf. His role was to provide on-the-ground reports and interviews, adding to the show's realistic and unscripted feel. Throughout the show, Craig would consistently mock the situation, injecting a sense of humor and skepticism to proceedings. Together, this mix of trusted and recognizable personalities made Ghostwatch seem like a genuine live broadcast, helping to convince many viewers that what they were watching was indeed real, despite being told otherwise before the show aired. With everything in place, at 9:25 p.m. on Halloween night 1992, Ghostwatch began its broadcast on BBC One.
Now on BBC One, Screen One presents an unusual and sometimes disturbing film marking Halloween. Michael Parkinson, Sarah Green, Mike Smith and Craig Charles star in Ghostwatch.
The show starts with Michael Parkinson telling us that what we are about to watch is a unique live investigation of the supernatural. We are then shown a clip filmed a few months prior in the girl's bedroom, purporting to show poltergeist activity, as we hear banging sound and objects getting flung across the room, followed by a bedside lamp exploding. We then get a rather cheesy montage of the production team getting things ready on location at the fictional Fox Hill Drive, before we join Craig Charles outside the house, and he is in fine form.
Craig, how are you?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, I'm fine. I've taken the Valium, man.
We are then introduced to Mike Smith, who tells viewers to call the number on screen if they want to share their own personal experiences of ghosts or the supernatural. Those who called this number during the broadcast were played a recorded message telling them that the show was fictional, before being given the chance to share their own ghost stories. However, due to the sheer number of people calling, many were instead greeted with an engaged tone, which likely added to the realism instead of reassuring viewers that it was fiction. Outside the house, we meet Sarah Green, who is going to be spending the night inside the house with the family, and Sarah introduces us to the team who will be accompanying her. We are also shown all of the technical equipment the team have on site before Sarah heads into the house for the first time. Throughout the show, we go back and forth between the studio and the house, and not much happens initially, apart from this cruel jump scare by Craig Charles. Back in the studio, Michael and Dr. Pascoe answer a call from a supposed viewer, claiming to have seen a figure standing by the curtains on the earlier tape in the girl's bedroom. If we check what was actually broadcast earlier, we can see there's nothing there, but when the footage is played back in the studio, we can clearly see a figure of some kind standing by the curtain. However, when the footage is rewound to confirm this, we see that the figure has once again disappeared. A little later, we get a tour of the house, and we learn more about how all of this paranormal activity started. Pam tells us about the first night something happened, and how she began attributing the bangs they were hearing to faulty central heating pipes, hence the poltergeist's name of Mr. Pipes. Kim says that Mr. Pipes lives in the room through the door under the stairs, claiming to have seen him once through the gap in the door. Later, Pam reveals that this room is called the Glory Hole. Yes, it's really called the Glory Hole.
The Glory Hole, as we used to call it when I was a kid.
And recounts an occasion when she became trapped down there, unable to open the door to get out, and feeling as though someone was down there with her, hence why the door to the room is now boarded up. Pam then tells us how she had asked the council to move the family to alternative accommodation, but they didn't believe her story, prompting her to go to the media instead in the hope that someone would believe them and would be able to help. A short while later, we are played an eerie, sinister recording of an account with the ghost, recorded during an interview session with the family by Dr. Pascoe. In the recording, we hear one of the children who is possessed by the ghost speaking in a deep, grumbling voice.
Grunt or something. If you can grunt, can you speak? Oh dear God, Susan.
Later, Dr. Pascoe argues with physicist Emilio Silvestri, who is highly skeptical of the whole thing, before we go back to the house, and it is at this point in the show that things slowly start to happen, starting with one of the camera crew's watches stopping. An overly enthusiastic Craig Charles starts interviewing different members of the local neighborhood to get their take on everything, before Parkinson interrupts him to go back to the house as a mysterious wet patch has appeared on the living room carpet.
Now, can you see this?
I certainly can, clearly.
Well, there's no way it could have got there.
The team then hear footsteps and scurrying in the walls and start investigating, but the children come running through to say that Pipes is here. So Sarah sends them back into their bedroom and then checks downstairs to find the children's drawings strewn all over the kitchen floor. Then the banging starts. Sarah and the team race upstairs, but are told to wait on the stairs by the team in the studio. They then pan the camera down to the door of the children's bedroom and see that this banging isn't evidence of paranormal activity, it is in fact Suzanne banging on the pipes.
Okay.
Parkinson immediately proclaims the whole thing to be a hoax, despite Dr. Pascoe fervently defending Suzanne's actions, claiming this to be part of some kind of invoking process that precedes the genuine appearance of paranormal activity. With Suzanne in tears downstairs, Parkinson keeps pressing her as to why she was faking the whole thing, but Pam comes back in to defend her family. After this, we hear about some of the phone calls the show has received from viewers. Of course, these aren't real phone calls, but the show does a pretty good job of convincing us that these calls and messages are genuine. Mike tells us that a lot of people have been calling regarding the strange figure seen in the bedroom at the start of the show, with all of them giving surprisingly similar descriptions of this figure. An older man, or possibly woman, bald with a skull-like head, dark eyes, and wearing a black robe or dress. Dr. Pascoe interrupts to ask if a tape can be pulled of her interview with Kim a few months prior, in which we hear Kim give the exact same description of the ghost. Just at that moment, we go back to the house, where we hear the sound of cats in the walls of the house. Kim then comes down to say something is wrong with Suzanne, and after running upstairs, they discover that Suzanne's face is covered in scratches. The decision is then made to get the children out of the house. It is at this point that things start to take a very sinister turn. The audio-visual equipment starts to malfunction, banging sounds can be heard throughout the house, and a picture frame comes flying off the wall.
And from the ceiling. Ah!
Oh.
Suzanne then starts speaking in that same deep grumbled voice we heard earlier on the tape. Sarah frantically searches the house for Kim and eventually finds her hiding behind the refrigerator door. The cat noises then return, and the team believe it is coming from the room under the stairs. But after removing the barricade and opening the door, one of the team is injured by a falling mirror.
Mike! Oh my God, what's happened?
And then the feed completely cuts out in terrifying fashion.
Mum, help me! Don't leave me, Mum!
There seem to be some technical issues as we see Craig outside, seemingly unaware that he is live, before the feed to the house suddenly returns and all appears to be normal. The team in the studio look bewildered as to what has just gone on, and as they attempt to get the audio feed to Sarah and the house back, they take a very important phone call in which an anonymous caller provides some information about the history of the house. The caller says that a man named Raymond Tunstall had lived in the house previously and was the nephew of one of the previous tenants. The caller claims to have been Raymond's social worker when he came out of psychiatric hospital, and says that Raymond had had multiple convictions for molestation, aggravated abuse, and abduction of minors. Raymond had developed paranoid fantasies and eventually took his own life in the basement of the house. The caller hangs up, and as Dr. Pascoe looks scared and confused, she eventually notices that something isn't right, realizing that the footage they are seeing of everyone in the living room isn't live. It's footage from earlier in the evening, evidenced by the fact that the picture frame that had flown off the wall earlier was back on the wall. Dr. Pascoe concludes that the ghost is in the machine, controlling the footage. Wind starts to fill the studio, and Dr. Pascoe believes that the program has inadvertently created a massive seance which is getting out of control. Back at the house, we see the police arriving on scene, and Pam, Kim, and the injured crew member from earlier being escorted from the house. With the house in complete darkness, we switch to the infrared camera. The cameraman and Sarah are looking for Suzanne, whose voice they heard earlier, and believe she is in the cupboard under the stairs. They eventually find a flashlight, and Sarah approaches the door to the basement, but it's blocked, and she can't get in. But suddenly, the door of the basement flies open. Sarah cautiously approaches, but just as she enters, the door slams shut. In the studio, lights start exploding, objects start flying all over the place, and as everyone begins to clear the studio, a confused Michael Parkinson sits in disbelief, witnessing what is happening. The show ends with Parkinson completely alone in a dark studio, wandering around aimlessly, confused as to what to do. He approaches one of the cameras and remarks that the auto cue is still working before becoming possessed by the ghost.
Round and round the garden, like a teddy bear.
Didn't believe that story was a sentence. Did you?
And with that, Ghostwatch was over. Following the show's broadcast, the BBC was besieged with complaints from irate and frightened viewers. Figures vary, but it's estimated that there were around 1 million phone call inquiries to the BBC switchboard on the night of the broadcast, including tens of thousands of complaints. The British tabloids criticised the broadcaster for the disturbing nature of some of the scenes in the show, particularly towards the end when Sarah Green was locked in the basement and the final scene of Michael Parkinson's eerie possession. Despite airing as a Screen One drama, Screen One being a popular British television anthology drama series, many viewers believed the events of the show to be real, and there were multiple reports of the psychological effects it had on viewers, particularly children. However, tragically, it appeared the show had had a profound and eventual deadly effect on one teenager, 18-year-old Martin Denham. Martin, who suffered from learning difficulties and had a mental age of 13, took his own life 5 days after the show aired, and his parents blamed Ghostwatch for his death. His home suffered from the same central heating problem as described in the show, causing the pipes in his house to knock. And after seeing this on the show, Martin became worried, tragically ending in him taking his own life. The Broadcasting Standards Commission reviewed the case, initially dismissing their complaint, but eventually ruling that the BBC had a duty to do more than simply hint at the deception it was practicing on the audience. In Ghostwatch, there was a deliberate attempt to cultivate a sense of menace. Despite claiming that the vast majority of viewers would have been able to recognize the show as fiction, after the BSC published their ruling, the film's producers issued an apology, stating that had they realized what the audience reaction would have been, they would have taken steps to ensure the fictional nature of the show was much clearer. In 2002, the show was released on DVD, and a retrospective documentary titled Ghostwatch Behind the Curtains was released in 2013, discussing the making of the show, and is definitely worth a watch. The program itself has been repeated internationally, but since its broadcast, it has never been repeated in full on any UK television channel. Ghostwatch remains a fascinating and controversial piece of television history, one that blurred the lines between reality and fiction in a way that had never been done before. Its impact was immediate and profound, and serves as a reminder of the power of television and media to shape perceptions and evoke strong emotional responses. Even decades later, it's still remembered for its bold approach to storytelling, and is still as entertaining now as it was then. Whether you see Ghostwatch as a brilliant piece of horror or a cautionary tale about the responsibilities of media creators, there's no denying its place in the annals of TV history. While it may never be shown on UK television again, its legacy lives on through those who remember that eerie Halloween night in 1992. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this look back at the story of Ghostwatch, make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any thoughts or memories of watching Ghostwatch, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. Thanks everyone, and see you in the next video.